was very hard to hear my voice after 3 years of not hearing my voice and just hearing other people's voice, and then coming in and doing this thing, and then going back and posting and editing it.
Why? What's wrong with your voice?
Oh God, it's like nails on a chalkboard. You're not used to hearing your own voice.
Well, I finally, after a decade of listening to my own voice, got used to it. But yeah, for about a decade, I was very annoyed by the fact that somehow they added an accent to my recording, when obviously I don't have an accent in my head, right? Because
you don't have the
if I would recognize an accent in my head, I would remove it, right?
That's right. It works.
I would immediately correct it.
Yeah, that's you got a great accent, man. It gives like that authority to you. You have American accent, doesn't mean anything, but you got a German accent, British accent, Russian accent, instant authority.
Well, for my inner voice, I don't have an accent, but everybody else around me has one.
I wonder what that's like to hear American accents. Think, wow, you've got a really bizarre accent.
Well, obviously, so what happened historically, right? So when you go to school in Germany, they teach you Oxford English, and then usually it's being taught by a German. So it's double worse. And so I learned Oxford English taught by mostly German people in school, and then I went to Oxford to study English, and then I came back, and then for a decade I had probably 12 chances to speak English, and then I moved to California, where everybody had an accent.
As a California accent is very, very distinguishable.
Yeah, and I don't know, it's somewhat anecdotal, but when I first came here, I would always carry around a dictionary essentially, and then I'm somewhat proficient in German, since I studied a lot of German literature and other literature. Like, I literally have a degree in literature and linguistics and other nonsense. But based on like moving here, then having to relearn English after not learning English for a decade, so I'm carrying around my dictionary, and I'm still translating in my head, and I'm constantly looking for variations of words, as in I want to find a more precise word for something that I'm trying to say. And frequently there is not a word that's more precise what I was already using. And that was very annoying. But so it turns out that, again, fact check that, but English is actually a simplified version of German. It's a simplified version of Northern German.
I heard that about French too. I've heard that they say that the English is just French spoken very poorly.
That's, I don't know. That's complete nonsense. There's no relationship there.
What's been going on in your world? Last time we were on here, the kids at home really didn't get to find out who Chris Kameir is. So give us a background on yourself. Flaunt it a little bit, man.
So the lies that I tell myself about myself. Okay. Yeah. Well, there is no recollection. There's only like new stories that you tell yourself every time you tell it. It turns out a little different.
Yeah.
The short story is I got kicked out of school, I think at around age 11, because my teachers thought I was severely learning disabled.
Wow.
It took, I think, 18 months or 2 years for my new teachers to realize that wasn't the case. So instead, they made me valedictorian of the school and then graduated me 2 years later.
Wow.
And then I decided that the right path for me was to become probably a famous author, and the best way to do that is to enroll into university and start learning about classical literature. And I was a day from graduating from that when I realized that my job opportunities were basically limited to becoming an academic and teach literature in foreign countries. And so I literally didn't drive back to hand in my thesis paper. Instead, I enrolled that day into law school. I saw the inside of the law school, however many times it took to pass the tests. And during that time, I started working for startups already and started to do some regulatory work, and also started on a doctor thesis. The doctor thesis I never got around to defend ultimately. It was on a very boring topic on number regulation and telecommunication, but I ended up writing some of the deregulation papers for the German telecommunication markets by accident, and became general counsel of what turned out to be ultimately the largest privately owned internet service provider in Germany, which is the largest consumer market in Europe.
Oh my God.
And I was preparing the company to go public at a valuation at the time of $1 billion. That was early 2000. And then I got a call from our investment bank, and they said there was a Italian company that had gone public as an ISP, and they were interested in acquiring us. And I told him, well, we're worth $1 billion. If you want to write $1 billion check, here's the address. We ended up ultimately selling for a little less than that a couple of weeks later.
Wow.
And at the moment we signed that, I drove back to my office, cleaned it out, and resigned. And then the next day we started what we called a venture fund. And that was exactly February 27th, 2000. And then I needed an excuse to leave Europe and Germany specifically. So I found a startup in Southern California and used that as an excuse to come here every month. And then in September 2000, I permanently moved to Windansea Beach in La Jolla, and I keep moving up the coast and keep working on pursuing building the World Wide Web for the first time and failing at it.
Then how'd you come into Sustany? Or are we talking about that? You don't want to talk about that?
No, sure.
Okay.
So I was a lone wolf for a long time, just assisting startups and making angel investments and what interested me. And then I met my partner, and it was for the first time that someone kind of had the same philosophy and approach to technology and investment as I did. And so I texted him one night and told him, let's create a $100 million venture fund. And he texted back, okay. Yeah. And so the next day we were looking for office space and employees. And that is now some 6.5 years ago.
Last time we talked, we kind of went into a Bitcoin, capital B, Bitcoin, lowercase b. Bitcoin is going to be halving here really soon. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so Bitcoin, the network, uppercase B, is run by people that operate ASICs, which are computers of sorts that are specifically designed to produce this particular algorithm that the network uses to validate blocks. Oftentimes people will say they validate transactions. That's partially true. For that function, Bitcoin rewards the network with lowercase b Bitcoins, the mining reward. And so the creator of that network decided there should only ever be a total of 21 million of these lowercase b Bitcoins, and in a decreasing fashion reward people that are operating the network. So it started out with 50 Bitcoins for every block, which every block is roughly created every 10 minutes. If that changes,
we're creating 50 Bitcoins every 10 minutes.
Back then, yeah. At the starting point.
This is 2009-ish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then roughly every 4 years, is not an exact science, but roughly every 4 years, that particular reward halves. It runs because there's many different people that run these ASIC machines. Initially, you didn't need an ASIC machine. Initially, I had a Bitcoin node on my laptop. But ultimately, people started developing specific machines just to run this algorithm because it became more and more competitive. You needed more and more compute powers, and now you need warehouses of these computers in order to actually obtain this reward.
So you running on your own computer, you're never going to be able to mine a Bitcoin.
No, no, you won't be able to run that algorithm, or a full node for that matter anymore. So full node has the complete transaction history of the blockchain.
And now in 2024, it's going to be happening on 4/20, on April 20th.
It was 12 and a half, it goes to 6 and a quarter, something like that. As I said, ultimately, it's not going to matter.
When people think about when it started, how many are left to mine, they would think, oh, that'll be done in the next couple of years, but it's just going to keep going.
Going to keep going for 100 years. But
wow.
People bought these miners, so have capital investment in there, so they will start turning them off if the electricity that you're spending on mining is exceeding the revenue, right, that you're gaining either in terms of the mining reward or the fee.
So these gigantic warehouses, their electricity bill is more than they're able to pull in from what they're generating.
Right, and this, this happens probably on a day-to-day basis, that certain miners will just have to turn off their particular mining installation because their localized energy cost is just higher than what they can obtain. And that comes back to what I mentioned last time. This Bitcoin is really not the only, but substantially the only network from the perspective of demand power that's global. Like typically you got localized demand, right? So your electricity bill, if you look at this, you're probably paying wherever you are, let's call it 12, 16 cents per kilowatt hour. Right? So for you, if you were to install a miner, that would be your price per kilowatt hour. Well, because Bitcoin is a global demand network, if I'm sitting in Asia next to a hydro dam where there's a lot of extra energy that this hydro dam is producing that it's not selling to the community, and they are happy to make 2 cents selling it to you in your shed where you're running that. Well, you with your Bitcoin miner here in Southern California competing with that one. A lot of these motivated reasoning articles out there, including there was one I remember from the New York Times that claims that Bitcoin is bad for the environment and unnecessarily is using energy. Well, that's presupposing that this energy wasn't already created. This energy is always already created from a practical terms, because in simple terms, if that creator of that energy could sell it to you at a higher price, they would. So the TLDR is basically Bitcoin is sucking up unused energy that would just go to ground. So that's the entire argument. You'll find long papers that are discussing the usefulness and or the polluting quality of mining. Is all utter nonsense, right? It's ignoring, most likely willfully ignoring, fundamental principles of economics. Right? So under normal market conditions, prices fall to the marginal utility. So that could be zero. The marginal utility could be zero in that example where Bitcoin miners are using flare gas, right? So there's Bitcoin mining installations that are being installed next to facilities where there's gas that is just being burned off. And if you can convert this into energy, you're actually willing to pay for that, right? So again, that has always been either an urban myth or more likely it's some form of motivated / read paid campaign against mining, right? Against the Bitcoin mining network specifically. It's very irritating because you can just defeat this with a common sense argument. You don't need to have any specific knowledge about this particular industry or energy, or it's just a common sense argument.
Crypto has too many tokens, and mergers are coming.
Mergers are coming?
Yeah. M&As could give birth to tokens such as Shiba Peeps and Folky Doges, according to one expert.
Okay. All right. Again, a lot of mythology there. So we can either dive into the language of this multi-massive online player game that's crypto, or we can stay in the real world. So unfortunately, people have started to use crypto as shortcut for cryptocurrency, which I generally oppose. Crypto is short for cryptography. It's for encryption. So the larger point there being, so if you look at this from that perspective, you understand that tokens specifically are simply standardized smart contracts. What is a smart contract? It's a code that you can deploy that will execute the same function over and over again. It's an if-then statement, if you will. So how blockchains work is a blockchain is just moving, hence blocks, forward in a particular time frame. So in Bitcoin's case, it's every 10 minutes. In other blockchains, it's another variable, but essentially every 10 minutes, every certain moment in time, it smashes transactions into one block and moves on the chain. So it's a time-stamped transaction record. So blockchains were not invented by the Bitcoin white paper. There's a reference in the fourth footnote towards this particular time-stamping mechanism, which was written about a decade before the Bitcoin white paper. But so the point there being is a token is created on top of a blockchain. So a blockchain, if and when and where it has a scripting language of sorts, like an EVM and like Ethereum's virtual machine, it allows you to create other functions on top of that. So Bitcoin, and specifically coin, there is the reward mechanism, as we talked about earlier. So coins are the native reward mechanisms of a blockchain. Tokens are basically an API functions to that blockchain. So you could create one, and hundreds of thousands of people have created one. It takes 10 minutes.
Yeah, I created one for Crypto The WonderDog, the CTWD. And I come over and we did a show and showed how simple it was to do that.
So it's one smart contract that you launch in that blockchain. Then you constitute the functions and the denomination and the supply of that particular token. So tokens are supposed to be a peer-to-peer bearer instrument created on a public blockchain. And I say public because a lot of people talk about private blockchains. That's kind of saying private internet in a sense. But private internet is a virtual private network, so it's kind of nonsense. There's no private blockchain.
And a lot of these tokens are built on the Ethereum network.
Yes, which was one of the earlier blockchains, and it made it very easy.
Explain what when you say it runs on the Ethereum network.
First of all, you have to launch the smart contract that creates the token. And then if you want to actually move control over this particular digital bearer instrument from one controller to another, you have to engage with that particular network. It moves it forward. It changes control. So blockchains are actually applications, and more precisely they are state machines. So what a state machine does, it just changes control over a set of bytes from one control address to another.
Hmm.
That's all it does, right? So you have a private key, and through engaging with the blockchain and a public address to that private key, I can change control from my control address to yours. And that's how blockchain works in very simple terms. So if you want to understand public key cryptography, it's pretty easy. If you're using a Mickey Mouse example, imagine Bob wanted to send something to Lisa in a secure way, and let's call it a message. So Bob sends Lisa a box with a lock on it, but doesn't send her the key. So now Lisa has a box with Bob's lock on it, let's say, and can't open it. So what she does is she adds her own lock to that box and sends it back to Bob. And then Bob takes his lock off, sends it back to Lisa. And now Lisa has a box with her key and her lock. And now she can open the box and control whatever's in there. So this is in Mickey Mouse terms how public key cryptography works. And so that's in principle how all tokens work in very simplified ways. And then you associate that to particular functions. So you build some form of digital vending machine, and you allow that particular token to unlock certain functions within that particular vending machine.
You're giving away tokens for certain use. So you go onto their website and you play around for a minute, and you're going to earn tokens for staying on their website, and then you can later on turn these tokens into for something else.
Mm-hmm. So in my head, Bitcoin is like a bubblegum machine. So these old-fashioned ones where you take a quarter, you put it in there, and you'll twist the dial. So that's Bitcoin. It has this singular function that it kind of does. And then if you look at more complex blockchains like Ethereum, they're like this vending machine with all these other different products. And so you have to have the right coin to get the right product out. And the product could be anything, right? It doesn't have to be a thing. It could be a service, if you will. And that service could be computing something. That service could be, it's a digital sword in a game, and you'll pull that out, right? And in very simplified terms, tokens enable you to use this digital vending machine.
A guy that I wasn't really familiar with until just lately, Michael Saylor, and he seems to pop up a lot if you do any kind of search now on YouTube. Him talking on Fox, on CNBC, on all these finance shows, saying that you just need 0.1 Bitcoin, and that will change your life
over a long period of time. Yeah. It might you should first change your thinking. So I think it's more important inside there is you need to start long-term thinking, essentially.
Yeah, this isn't you're not going to get rich overnight with what this is. It's going to keep going up, as we've seen in history. It just keeps, after every halving, there's a pullback. It goes up a little bit. There's about a 4-year lull, and then it hits its run again. We've come into that 4 years again. We've just seen it go up past 70. It's hovering around 65 now. What's the barometer on this right now? Is it going to keep pulling back, or are we going to keep going up a little bit?
Bitcoin does what Bitcoin does. It's not really rational over long periods of time. Because of its supply function, since there's always going to be less, and people will keep losing their private keys, and the inventory will shrink, and the mining reward will shrink, it's always going to be more scarce. People tend to like scarce things. They collect scarce things. So that's the main dynamic, really. And then the secondary dynamic is the community that's growing around it, that just believes in that principle. To a large extent, it's a philosophy, right? It's at this very moment in time, it doesn't have a whole lot of outside utility. It doesn't really facilitate real-world economic activity on a daily basis. It's a half used as a long-term store of value, and you see these pie chart graphics that show you how, like when a Bitcoin was first acquired and then when it was first moved, and you can layer these on top. So there's some of these Bitcoins, like Satoshi's Bitcoins, have never been moved. So that's kind of the bottom layer, and it's a certain percent. And then some Bitcoins have been created and have moved for 8 years, 7 years, 6 years, right? So it's just either there's two options: either the particular individual who had control still has control and just hodling and holding it and expecting the value to grow, or she has just simply lost control. So wherever you want to set the dividing line, then you can say, okay, these people will probably either never sell, this is loss. These people, you can see, have a certain turnaround time where they do sell, and then there's certain people who trade on a daily basis. To that extent, you set your own barometer and say, okay, this is speculation, this is investing. So every person internally has their own time horizon where they say, okay, this is the money I want to spend, this is the money I want to save, this is the money I want to invest. And most people today fall into two buckets. They use it as an instrument of speculation or an instrument of saving. And that's it. And every person should have a percentage of their savings in that technology. Because thus far, and with every day and every month and every year that passes, that's more true. Thus far, it's good savings technology. If all of your savings are in your home, that's a single point of failure. If that particular thing, it's not very liquid, but B, if it gets to a valuation that is below what you invested in it, it's no longer a savings, it's a liability. And for most people, it is a liability. That's the unfortunate thing. And overall, if that's your only house, it's a liability, full stop. It's not an investment.
That's what I need to get my daughter to understand. I keep telling her, save money, and she keeps spending it on tickets and concerts and these experiences. And at a young age, I keep begging her to set up her Coinbase account and just start putting a little bit in there. Every time that she spends $1, that $1's never going to be found again. But if she starts putting this away right now, by the time she's my age, she'll have a nice little chunk in there. So
yeah, obviously I can never give anybody financial advice. I'm neither qualified nor educated. But if you want to give your daughter advice, or anybody at a young age, best advice might be to just dollar cost average whatever amount is comfortable on a bi-weekly basis into Bitcoin, and just essentially let it run until you are 50, 60, 100 years old.
Mm-hmm. Besides Coinbase, I know that in the U.S. there's not a whole lot of ways. I mean, maybe there are now. I'm not sure, but whenever I first started buying it, there wasn't a whole lot of ways to buy Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. We have Coinbase, and I guess Crypto.com now, which they kind of hit the mainstream with Crypto.com Center, there where the Lakers play, and got Matt Damon on board now, and a few other celebrities, I guess. But besides Coinbase, what other entries into the world of crypto are you aware of?
Well, in the US, aside from that, you got Kraken and Gemini. We are an investor in Gemini, for full disclosure. But yeah, I don't even know if Crypto.com is still a player, to be honest. I don't pay much attention to the.
I still keep getting alerts. I mean, I get an email every once in a while from crypto, because I have a Crypto.com account. So
okay,
I guess there's some.
No, I was referring to whether or not they're still running in the US, but
Binance. No, the Binance was another one that I used, and they. When they first started, I was using it, and then they split to Binance USA, right?
Yeah, had to for legal reason. I don't know. Is Binance US even still around, or did they shut it?
Yeah, because I got a little, not much. I have a little bit in there, but yeah, where the hell did it go? The Binance.us is where I now you can trade on there, obviously.
Well, yeah, ultimately you should do the experiment, yes. Maybe as a novice, buy a Bitcoin there, but then also do that experiment of doing self-custody.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, even I think I own every hardware device that acts as a wallet, but they're all here in my drawer. I kind of stopped using them. I used them for a little while.
Yeah,
it's tough.
I did get Trezor, right? They sent me a what's called a cold wallet, right? Cold storage.
Yeah.
And it was a bit of a learning curve because I didn't have tech support on the other line walking me through this, holding my hand. I ended up eventually just not even using it. But that was 5-6 years ago that I had that, and I ended up just never using it. I think I sold it. But what are they easier now? Are they easier to use, to get in, to put your stuff in there?
No.
Marginally
easier, I'd say. I think by and large, it's just not a user experience that many people can be convinced.
And I guess there's 1,000 YouTube videos to show you how to use this stuff too.
Sure.
Yeah.
But again, if it's so far outside of your daily behavior, there's many other developments now that keep it safe. They're all not much less, but less cumbersome than having a separate device, because everybody has been trained, right, to use biometrics for authentication with their phone, and two-factor authentication and social recovery. So at some point in time, hopefully we can introduce these safety mechanisms in a way that they're kind of common sense.
Okay, and explain to me, because I have had Bitcoin stolen from me from when it was sitting online in a custodial, one of these trading companies, and when I went online, I found out there was a number of other people who had the same experience, where they had crypto stolen out of their online wallet from the same company.
Well, the large difference is that all of these trading companies ultimately use database solutions. So they, in order to facilitate real-time trading and not incur the fees that the blockchain charges, you have to move it off the blockchain. So they're just creating an entry for you, but it's what's being traded on that chain is ultimately just a reference to that record, not the actual record. So they're only transferring out the digital bearer instrument once you move it into a cold storage, cold wallet to your own address. Other than that,
you can't steal that.
Yeah. So other than that, the majority as a good practice of the coins and tokens that you're moving on or to that particular centralized exchange should not even be available on the blockchain per se. It's in their cold storage usually. The vast majority, let's call it 90%, I don't know what it is in real terms, but the vast majority of that is not actually accessible in practical terms.
Another thing that came up that it was a little bit of a mystery to me was that the ETF, Bitcoin as an ETF, and I saw something that said it's the best performing ETF in history at a total market cap. I forgot how long it was. So it was 67 billion total market cap for the Bitcoin ETF.
Not surprising. I mean, essentially there was a couple of years long advertising campaigns for these things to exist, and ETFs have existed. So they're specifically spot ETFs. So spot meaning that these entities have to buy the Bitcoin. if it's a Bitcoin ETF, they have to actually have the Bitcoin. Right? Before that,
they were just going on what the market value was.
Yeah. So before that, Grayscale wasn't a spot ETF, right? So they didn't have the equivalent of Bitcoins in real terms. And so, whereas in Canada, they had already two or three Bitcoin ETFs for quite some time. But so these new ETFs are spot ETFs. So these people actually have to buy the Bitcoin. If people want to buy the ETF, they have to actually go into the market and find the Bitcoin and add them to the inventory. So there's big companies that have that. I mean, it would be a huge oversight for a large institution not to have one, because again, you know that there's market demand. It's a universal product, and endowments have been buying Bitcoins for some time. So it would be kind of gross negligent to not have that as a product for your institution.
It's hugely interesting that Jamie Dimon years ago said that he would fire immediately anyone who suggested to buy cryptocurrency Bitcoin in their company, and then behind the scenes they were buying it all up whenever his that went out, the price dropped, and their company bought it all up, and now it's just a common thing through a lot of these.
But which, like, if you think about that, that kind of sounds like market manipulation.
It does. They said it was completely legal, but I don't know how that's legal when they knew they were going to affect the market by just their words, not anything else, but just their words. And everyone screamed and decided that, oh, this is horrible, I'm not going to get into it. And people that had it dropped it. And they knew that was going to happen. And they went and snatched it all up.
It's what are you going to do? It's bankers, right?
Yeah. And we all know what
they don't like when you compete with them.
El Salvador, as a country, their banking system, their monetary thing fell apart after the Civil War or during the Civil War. And when the dust settled, they went to a digital currency.
They started supposedly mining some and supposedly bought some for their treasury, and they made it legal tender, which is it's a nice gesture, because that obviously then makes it non-taxable if you do that. And I would recommend actually that every nation state should just make it legal tender. But in practical terms, you can obviously not really use it as a currency because the fees are so high. So that comes back to this idea that Bitcoin competes with fiat currencies at this point in time is obviously nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not practical. But in practical terms, it has no relevance outside of just putting out a nod to that technology. And anecdotally, there is and were some shops who introduced Bitcoin Lightning functions on top of that for payments. But again, as far as I know, there has not been any mass adoption anyway. As far as I understand, is that people still, if and where they're using cryptocurrencies, they're using Tether and other tokens that are tethered to the United States dollars, which is always ultimately comes back to the primary use case of a currency is simply that of language of value. So your starting point is always that. If you have to overcome that cognitive friction of having to translate the price of something that you're looking at into whatever unit of account you just made up, you just created the greatest friction to commerce that you could possibly imagine, right? Because you invented it in your language. Anyway, so the world wants to speak US dollar. It's just a factual thing. It's sort of irrelevant from a technology perspective, as in, since the default medium of exchange is just bytes anyway. then from a technologist perspective, the unit of account is just an interface function. I would argue that the language and unit of account for Bitcoin is the US dollar, right? People think in terms of their Bitcoins as I have $1 million worth of Bitcoin, right? They don't say I have 16 trillion or whatever the right numbers of Satoshi. So that's meaningless.
Yeah.
Even for people who have been in the Bitcoin space, I doubt that anybody, very few will translate the banana price that they're looking at into Satoshis. It's just not very practical. So hence, it's important to understand that currencies are technologies and do not, technologies are supposed to make your life easier and in the context of commercial activity, increase velocity. And if you're looking at a currency and if you just prevent that from happening by introducing your own new language, that's not good technology. That's all there is. So having 100,000 tokens that all have different names that all require translation in people's head doesn't make commercial activity any easier. It makes it hard. So that's why it's important to understand tokens for what the primary function is. The primary function is it's a technological function, right? And so you want to abstract this away from the user. So if you're deploying these technologies, these tokens, then on the application level, on the app that you're providing your user on whatever it is on your mobile phone, don't show the user that. The user wants to see his language of value and not try to understand that she is using 15 Satoshis to pay for the chewing gum. They want to know that this chewing gum is 5 cents because that's the language of value they have been indoctrinated, or it might be pesos. It doesn't matter. That part doesn't matter. And it's surprising that, or maybe it's unsurprising, that hundreds of thousands of people decided they want to invent new units of accounts. Again, it's like children coming up with their own language, and only that group of children is understanding what they're saying.
Yeah.
But again, currencies, they live and die by their network effect. If you have this alternative currency in your wallet and you show up to a store and they will look at your alternative currency and tell you, I don't even know what that is. This is a piece of paper with some funny people on it, but that could happen to you with the US dollar as well, right? You show to some indigenous tribe and they will happily burn it, but don't give you anything in return.
Give me a goat and we can talk, but you take your funny money and go somewhere else.
Right. It's just that the US dollar in its printed form just has a lot more brand value, a lot more recognition, because we introduced it either through weaponry or through citizens in that country, and they just started to use it.
I had other things I wanted to get to, but we've already run overtime as it is, so that's just more fodder.
You have to learn to interrupt me.
You know what happened? You don't spew forth a whole lot of unnecessary information. It seems like everything that comes out of your mouth tends to ring a note with something with a lot of people. I mean, a lot of even some of the comments we got on for last week were, what do you do? Everyone's very impressed with you so much. So
surprising, yes.
But I enjoy this very much, and obviously, if I didn't, we wouldn't be doing it. But I dig talking with you. And
if we keep doing it, we need to call it something else than the WonderDog. So the Germanish philosopher Rance from the West Coast.
Last week I had my producer in here, and he every he was showing me the time on the phone. I'm like, all right, I know. Just hold on, we'll make it. We'll get it out. So great talk, man. Next week.
We'll see.
What?
We'll see.
We'll see what the outcome is on our views.
It's very therapeutic. It's
Isn't it?
yeah. It's like how do you describe that? It's like I used to write a lot as a child, and I used to call it throwing up on paper. Yeah, that's why it's.
Did you write as much as you talk?
Yeah. Well, at any given point in time, I have 100 articles in different stages of completion. Most of them I will never complete, I'm sure.
Have you finished any of them? I mean, obviously.
Yeah. Sure. If you just quote unquote Google me, you'll find the ones that I ended up publishing.
Yeah, you and Forbes, right?
Yeah.
Got a couple over there.
Yeah. The shorter versions are on Forbes.
The Reader's Digest versions.
Yeah, just go to Hacker Noon for longer versions. That's probably more interesting. You can start on the Forbes version because they are limited to 1,000 words.
Are they tell you?
Yeah.
Wow.
The process of writing for these is to get it down to that length, at least for me, because I like to be precise in language, and so sometimes and oftentimes, more often than not, it will take a paragraph to describe the particular utility usage and implementation of a phrase or even word within the context.
Yeah.
Right? And that's important, right? So if I tell you I saw a jaguar in the parking lot, you're thinking car. If I told you I see a jaguar and we're at the zoo, I'm thinking animal. But in the context of discussing anything worth discussing, you have to be precise in your language. That's how you advance ultimately the body of human knowledge. Otherwise, you're just regurgitating something if you don't.
Well, I don't speak a lot, so.
All right, my friend. I will talk to you next week.
All right.